If you're a viewer from Latvia, or at least have a particular interest in it, considering you're here for this series, I highly suggest you check out the video series Atslēgas or Keys, currently available on YouTube. It's a series done by the late Mārtiņš Čibilds, and is a great look at key moments in Latvian political history, their impact and legacy today. Today's video, in fact, is directly inspired by episode 25 of Atslēgas, concerning the presidents of Latvia and made back when only 5 people had taken on the role, 2 more having joined the ranks since. Highly critical of most of them, the video has urged me to tell you more about the president's basic duties and powers, and the broader perception of all our country leaders since then. My name is Walter, and I welcome you to Politics Far From Home. Depending on who you ask, a casual political observer will either tell you that the president is largely a figurehead role and the real power rests in the hands of the prime minister, or that the president is far too powerful, quipping in the past about a Levits regime during his presidency. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. First off, how do you even elect the president? As I've mentioned in my first video and briefly in the election results one, the president in Latvia is not directly elected by the people, although some parties have been campaigning on a promise of bringing about a presidential vote. As it stands, the president is actually elected by the Saeima. Between 60 to 55 days before the end of the last president's term, the parties must nominate and officially apply their candidates to the election. Notably, the candidates don't have to be members of Saeima, or even official members of any political party. All they need is such a party's support. For example, in our last presidential election, this was the case for 2/3 of the candidates. Elena Pinto at the time was not part of the Saeima, although she joined the Progressives after the fact. Similarly, Uldis Pīlēns was a member of no party, but was behind the formation of the United List which supported him. Once the candidates are ready, Saeima votes in multiple rounds as necessary, until over half of Saeima votes in favor of a single candidate. It might seem a little convoluted as a process, and calls for a direct election might seem more justified. But don't worry, the process gets even more complicated after the fact. One of the president's most important responsibilities is to choose the person who will lead and form the next government after the Saeima elections, the Prime Minister, known in Latvia as the Minister-President. This person is in practical terms the most powerful politician in the country, and whose choices of ministerial positions will have long-reaching consequences for the entire country's political processes. That does then technically make the chain such that the people elect deputies, who then present and vote on the president, who then chooses the prime minister, who only then assembles the leaders of the government ministries. That said, this whole process does have a point to it. First, the selection of the president involves compromises between parties to limit the influence of a single party, and in fact allowing for selection of candidates entirely outside of Saeima. Then, through requiring agreement on the government leader and division of ministries, ensures no member party of the coalition gets shafted and is granted their fair share. Not to say it's a perfect system, just that it isn't as pointless as it might seem at a glance. So, what can the president actually do? Quite a lot and very little all at once. Essentially, the president's powers are fairly limited, but they also hold ultimate power over Saeima. On the international stage, the president is a step above the foreign minister and is the country's ultimate representative abroad, as well as the person to meet any dignitaries and diplomats visiting the country. Domestically, however, the president can take any law drafted and approved by Saeima, and if the president doesn't like it, they can send it right back and tell him to fix it up. If they send it back once more and the president is still not a fan, they can see if the people are just as interested in blocking the law from passing. If 1/10 of the voting population say so, a referendum can be held to determine the outcome of the law. The Saeima can technically block that referendum from happening, but not only would doing so be unpopular, it would also require a 3/4 majority being in agreement. Not only would that be tough, but you would expect such a huge coalition would have a bit more support in society for their decisions. Finally, the president has the power to just outright demand Saeima's resignation in another referendum, something our former President Valdis Zatlers did, for example, after Saeima refused to grant the right for investigators to search the properties of Ainārs Šlesers for evidence of criminal activity and corruption. So that's how you get a president in power and what they do. Let's take a look at our presidential track record. Interesting little tidbit, each and every president we've had has either represented no party at all, or the Greens and farmers specifically, or in the case of our first president, specifically the Greens. How peculiar. While I won't cover our pre-Soviet presidents, I need to bring up our one dictator, Carlos Ulmanis, who seized power from the democratic government in 1934 and remained in power until the Soviets invaded in the 40s. A lot can be said about him, but having been at the helm right as we lost independence, the man became synonymous with it, and part of the nostalgia of a better past and dreams of freedom. The reason I'm telling you this is to illustrate that when Guntis Ulmanis, the man's great-nephew, was elected president by Saeima in 1993, this was the political equivalent of jingling keys in front of people's faces. That said, he probably did an alright job in an important era, helped move us in the direction of the EU, NATO, and the West as a whole, and you could argue that you can trace back at least some integration of Latvian Russians to his efforts. He also had an affair with a woman 3 times younger than him and had a daughter out of wedlock with her. Whoopsie. Next up was none other than Vaidavīte Freiberga, our first and thus far only female president. She's also one of our most beloved and most fondly remembered country heads. That video from Atslēgas I mentioned at the start kind of felt like a roast of every president besides her. And it's understandable why. She was elected specifically not to represent any party or power bloc in Saeima, was a highly educated woman with experience representing Latvia abroad as she was a child of exiles, became a professor in Montreal, and when she was elected she had been back in Latvia for a year, having helmed the Latvian Institute. She was charismatic, well-spoken, and if the main role of the president is that of a figurehead at home and abroad, she nailed it. Notably, for a long time, a lot of Latvians fondly reminisced of her time as one where at least one of our politicians had a grasp of foreign languages other than Russian. Next up, we had good old Valdis Zatlers. He is to me a curious case of presidential dichotomy. Just like Freiberga, he was brought in from outside of Saeima, not a member of any party, and previously having been a notable doctor. Also notable is that he had already been accused of criminal activity prior to becoming president. Accusations included requesting unsanctioned payment from his patients and accepting bribes. And yet, what probably sticks out the most about Zatlers is something put brilliantly in the Olas song Presidencies. Zatlers wanted to fire Saeima, but Saeima fired Zatlers. 2 great lines, which got both the fact that he did fire Saeima wrong, as well as how Saeima didn't fire him, although they do have such powers vested in them. His term just ran out and they didn't re-elect him. In fact, the only president we've ever re-elected was Ulmanis. The extremely abridged version of this is that our anti-corruption agency KNAB had and has been going after Einar Schlesers for a long time. It's been over a decade-long dance of evidence and suspicion that he's committed crime, into KNAB is investigating, into there is a roadblock, into Schlesers says this was all a smear campaign from political opposition. In 2011, that roadblock was Saeima itself, as Schlesers was a member of it, and it ruled against allowing KNAB searching his properties. Zatlers responded by announcing that a referendum will be held to fire Saeima just days before Saeima voted on the next president, and yeah, not a huge surprise he didn't get re-elected. Now, had Zatlers been brilliant at representing us as a figurehead at home and abroad? No, not at all, but he did successfully do the firing Saeima when they pull some nonsense job and rightfully called out oligarchic influence in politics. He was popular for it, and his newly created Reform Party did pretty well in the following elections. Our next president was once again not out of party, as Andris Bērziņš was a representative of the Greens and Farmers, a wealthy millionaire with bank and business ties, a former late Soviet politician, and native from Sigulda. I still recall him doing opening speeches at the start of one particular school year. He first came to our school, whimpered about his past on stage, about how he scratched his name into some desk, then got in a car and did the same goddamn thing in front of a different school in Sigulda. I was maybe 12 or 13 at most, and even then I was unbearably embarrassed that this guy was representing our whole country. Others felt similarly for different reasons. Wishy-washy stance on the Russian language referendum, threatening reporters for filming him and his son, fairly weak position towards Russia when it came to Crimea and the Olympics. People didn't like him too much because he had an immense air of rich man ruling over the commons, as much as he denied having ties to oligarchs and that he'd be following their interests.
In these 20 years, we have undergone a complete transformation from a Soviet-occupied...
Next up, we have Vējonis, who for a lot of people who didn't follow politics much was a president that just kind of came and went. In fact, a lot of people will find the most memorable thing about him to be his "gotta have a swig first" line immediately after being confirmed for a job. He was actually pretty popular at the start, as he seemed like the average everyman. His popularity was comparable to Freibergen. But when it became apparent that 1, he sucked at English even though he was our leading representative in NATO, and 2, he was just a very awkward and uncomfortable guy when speaking publicly, resulting in public opinion shifting massively back into the "oh god, this guy is embarrassing us" department.
President Trump was an outstanding host today. Thanks for hosting us.
More recently, he hung out with ISO Speed in front of our most important national monument, and people condemned him for letting the whole event take place and supposedly desecrating the monument without saying anything to Speed or educating him on the history or the symbolism. But, I mean, I really wouldn't have expected this guy in particular to do that. Come on, it's probably for the best that he didn't try. Oh boy, you hear that, guys? That's the COVID alarm. The COVID alarm means that whoever was in charge for the majority of COVID is a demonic villain dictator because they followed health professionals' advice on how to deal with a pandemic. When Levits was elected, I was actually pretty glad to hear we'd have someone both intelligent and capable of communicating in a foreign language effectively again. Unfortunately, we were instead now led by 2 people who were intelligent, but neither of whom were actually capable of effectively communicating anything, even in Latvian. It is admittedly really funny to me in hindsight to have people talking about the Levits Kariņš regime as this era of all-powerful dictators, and it was actually just 4 years of these 2 nerds bumbling through half their sentences and accidentally saying the stupidest shit on the planet in the other half. Finally, we get to our current president, Edgars Rinkēvičs. His election made some fairly big news around the world, as he's not just ours, but the EU's first ever gay president. Latvians are then sort of divided into 3 groups: those who love him for being a positive role model as well as a local champion for gay rights, those who believe we are in a gay dictatorship and forced transing is the next step, and those who are once again glad that there's just someone at the forefront who is human, charismatic, and once again able to communicate directly with foreign dignitaries and represent us abroad without constant embarrassing faux pas. After all, for over a decade before his election, he'd been our foreign minister and had done a bang-up job of it. Some people online were even a little worried at the prospect of losing such a good foreign minister to the presidency, but to be fair, the responsibilities overlap more than they don't. And there you have it. Those are our presidents. Our next presidential election is in 2027, and we'll be following a Sejm election in 2026. Who knows what the future will hold for us, but hey, at least you now know what the president does and who he is, and yeah, good for you.